Here are your hosts, Tom Russell and Frederick Lacey.
Ladies and gentlemen, I stand in awe over the quality of the topic we'll be discussing over the next 2 or 3 podcasts. And it's Bram Stoker's classic book, Dracula. Fred, why do you think the novel Dracula, why has that book by Bram Stoker endured for, with such power and popularity over the last 110 years?
Well, first of all, we'd like to point out here at Time Out for Truth some of the ideas that are fixed in people's mind that are indicative of that thing we call psychological sleep. And here's a good example. The novel Dracula is considered by literary types, of which I'm not, but it's generally considered to be called a Gothic novel, a great Gothic masterpiece. Well, we'll look at that for one quick moment, and we can see that the people who call this Gothic associate the word Gothic with dark. The big, dark Gothic cathedrals in Europe, the big, imposing dark with this little underlying emotional content there. Well, they're right about the underlying emotional content, but what they've completely missed is the idea that Gothic, real Gothic, was not dark. It's alive and colorful. All those dark-looking, ominous cathedrals in Europe were originally painted. The doors were painted bright gold. They were inviting. They were beautiful and sensory delightful to behold. So when we look at this novel, whatever people want to label it is fine, but we can see underneath there is a duality between the general darkness that exists out in the world of mechanicalness. Very, very dark. But underneath that, there is a layer of rich emotional undertones that vibrate throughout this. And this is precisely what we want to connect with, because it's the connection with this that leads us to the higher state.
And Fred, looking at the history of how the book was written originally, I did a little bit of research on it, and Bram Stoker began taking notes 7 years before the publication date. And then he spent many years researching the legends. I mean, he pulled a lot of things together. And one more point before we begin, just think of how much more effective it is to put these truths into a story. I mean, could you imagine just telling people about these facts? I mean, that's not going to have much of an impact, but you put it into a vivid story like that, and it really strikes deep.
It sure does.
Jonathan Harker, the hero of the story, he is summoned over to Transylvania to conduct some real estate business. So he begins his journey, from London, a long journey by train and coach and so forth. And he's headed over to Dracula's castle, and about halfway through the journey, as he's over into Romania, people ask where he's going. And when he tells them, they start crossing themselves. I mean, so the signals are right there that this is kind of a strange thing. And look at this reaction people are having. But at one point in his journey to Dracula's castle, he gets there's a letter waiting for him from Count Dracula. And I want to read that letter, or at least a part of it, because it's really, really good. He begins the letter, "Dear friend, welcome to the Carpathians. I am anxiously expecting you. Sleep well tonight." And then he says a few more friendly things. "Your friend, Dracula." I mean, isn't it interesting how darkness and evil always approaches us with that friendly smile so that it can apply its tricks?
And that brings us up to the next step in the novel. Which the author mentions, you read my mind, right?
Yes,
which the author mentions several times throughout it, so it must be important, very, very important, when he walked to the threshold, to the door of the castle, that Dracula just stood there, invited him to come in, but could not force him to walk through the door. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly the whole thing right there. Nothing bad you've ever done has been done. It's been done unconsciously, but not without your cooperation.
Exactly.
You willingly took your feet and walked down into that bar or did that thing. You did it of your own volition, all by yourself, and without, maybe you had an invitation from somebody, but you did the physical work yourself.
Yeah. The line you're referring to is so good. Dracula said, "Welcome to my house. Enter freely and of your own will." Harker adds in his diary there, he said, "He made no motion of stepping to meet me, but stood like a statue, as though his gesture of welcome had fixed him into stone." So again, Fred Harker took that step. And then once he's nervous at this point, but once he's inside, he writes, "The light and warmth of the Count's courteous welcome seemed to have dissipated all my doubts and fears."
Anything bad, any trouble that you get into always became, as I've said, out of your own free will, through the use of your own physical body. You opened your mouth. And it really can boil down to that, just to literally, lightly, just gently, but definitely keep your lips pressed together.
Exactly.
At that particular moment, when you're so strongly tempted to open your mouth and spew something out, just simply keep your lips together. It's that simple.
And it reminds me of the Bible's wisdom, the tongue, who can tame it? Like, it's not going to be an easy task. And the Bible's telling us that right there. I believe that's in the book of James. It's telling us that, but I tell you, we've got to wise up to just how important what you said is, Fred. I mean, just don't do it and realize you have the power not to do that. So now Harker's inside Dracula's castle, and he's beginning to slowly get the suspicion that he's a prisoner. It doesn't come to him all at once. One of the things that happens before he gets to the point of suspicion is that he sees how Dracula is a student of England. That Dracula has all kinds of books about English history and politics, and then they get into an all-night discussion about England. So here we can see what I think is a major theme throughout the novel Dracula about the cunning and the planning of evil, and how it will plan out every single detail that it possibly can. It's going to study the victims, just as Dracula had the entire library and had probably spent centuries studying England, getting ready for his big move. There was no stone left unturned. So isn't that interesting how the novel shows how cunning and how much evil plans its many pursuits?
It does. You can use the word cunning, but to also use it from another perspective, we have to be aware that evil is not lazy. It works hard.
Yes.
And he did what you would do if you were going someplace. He researched very thoroughly. If you were going to take a trip to China or something, you should research and know what you're going to. That's a very, very intelligent thing. The difference, of course, is what's in the heart of the person doing the research. But for most of us, we're very, very lazy. We don't want to make the continued, repeated, sustained effort to learn the subject, to read the books, to do the exercises, to actually spend even 5 minutes a day. Most people don't even do that.